The morning light filtered through the blinds of the administrative office at Wellington Music Academy. Lynn sat at her desk, arranging a stack of student applications with careful precision. At 32, she had perfected the art of blending into the background. Her plain clothes, minimal makeup, and quiet demeanor made her almost invisible to the prestigious faculty and talented students who passed through these halls. "Lynn, did you finish organizing those scholarship forms?" Ms. Reynolds, the office manager, called from across the room. "Just finished them," Lynn replied softly, pushing her glasses up her nose. "I also updated the calendar for next month's recitals." Ms. Reynolds nodded with approval. Lynn was always efficient, always reliable. The kind of employee who never caused problems or drew attention. Exactly how Lynn preferred it. As the clock struck noon, Lynn gathered her simple lunch, a homemade sandwich and an apple, and made her way to her favorite spot, a small bench tucked away in the corner of the courtyard. From here, she could hear the faint melodies drifting from the practice rooms. She closed her eyes as someone began playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The students' technique was good, but they rushed through the emotional passages, missing the heart of the piece. Lynn's fingers instinctively moved on her lap, muscle memory taking over. She caught herself and quickly folded her hands together, pressing them firmly against her knees. "Not bad, right?" Lynn jumped at the voice. Professor Takeda, the Academy's most respected piano instructor, stood nearby with a thermos in hand. Yes, they play well," she stammered, uncomfortable with being caught listening so intently. "But," Professor Takeda raised an eyebrow. "I didn't say anything," Lynn replied, looking down at her half-eaten sandwich. "Your face did." He smiled kindly. "You looked like my grandmother when I played too fast as a child." Lynn felt her cheeks grow warm. "It's not my place to judge." "Music is for everyone to judge," he said, taking a seat beside her. "That's what makes it beautiful." Lynn nodded politely but remained silent. Professor Takeda was known for his friendliness, but Lynn maintained her distance from all the faculty. It was safer that way. After an awkward moment, he sighed and stood up. "Well, enjoy your lunch, Lynn." She watched him leave, relief and a strange sense of loss washing over her. Once alone, she finished her meal quickly and returned to the safety of her desk. The afternoon passed with routine tasks, answering phones, filing paperwork, typing up program notes for upcoming recitals. It was mindless work that allowed her thoughts to wander. As she typed descriptions of complex piano techniques and emotional interpretations, no one suspected she understood these concepts on a bone-deep level. At 5 o'clock, Lynn was the last to leave the administrative offices. This was by design. She waited until the practice rooms emptied, until the hallways grew quiet and the janitor began his rounds in the opposite wing. She slipped into practice room 12, the smallest room with the oldest piano, the one no one wanted to use, and gently closed the door behind her. She placed her bag on the floor and stood for a moment in the silence, heart pounding as it always did during this daily ritual. Lynn sat down at the bench and placed her hands on the keys without pressing them. The cool ivory beneath her fingers felt like coming home. She allowed herself 1 minute to simply rest her hands there, feeling the potential energy humming beneath her fingertips. Then she began. No warm-ups, no scales. She dove straight into Bach's Prelude in C minor from the well-tempered clavier. The notes poured from her fingers like water, precise yet flowing. When she reached the end, she transitioned seamlessly into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, her body swaying gently with the mournful melody. For 20 minutes each day, Lynn allowed herself to become the person she had once been, the child whose talent had amazed teachers across 2 continents, whose future had seemed as bright and limitless as the stars. 15 years ago, Lynn had been a different person with a different name. She had been a student at the prestigious Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing, preparing for international competitions that would launch her career. Her parents had sacrificed everything for her education, working extra jobs, moving to the city, dedicating their lives to nurturing her gift. Then came the accident on a rainy highway, and in an instant everything changed. Her parents were gone, and with them her will to play. The piano, once her joy, became a painful reminder of all she had lost. Her uncle in America had taken her in, but he had little interest in a grieving teenage niece or her musical ambitions. When the money ran out, so did the lessons. Lynn put away her dreams along with her sheet music and found practical work to support herself. Now, after years of deliberate invisibility, the Wellington Music Academy was the only place where Lynn allowed herself small, stolen moments with a piano. No one here knew about her past. No one suspected that the quiet administrative assistant had once received standing ovations in concert halls. As she played her final piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune, tears slipped down her cheeks. This was the last piece she had performed for her parents. When the final note faded, she sat motionless, allowing the echo to die away completely before closing the piano lid with a gentle click. Lynn wiped her eyes, gathered her things, and carefully checked the hallway before slipping out. As she did every evening, she promised herself that tomorrow she wouldn't play. Tomorrow she would leave with everyone else. Tomorrow she would finally accept that her old life was gone, but she knew she would be back. The music was the only thing keeping her memories of her parents alive. It was both her wound and her bandage. Outside the academy, the evening air carried the faint scent of jasmine. Lynn pulled her light jacket tighter around her shoulders and began the walk to her small apartment 3 blocks away. She passed a coffee shop where a young woman was giving a casual performance on a small electronic keyboard. Lynn paused, watching through the window. The girl played with enthusiastic energy, if not perfect technique, and the small audience seemed delighted. "She's quite good, isn't she?" Lynn turned to find Professor Takeda standing beside her again, a paper coffee cup in hand. "Yes," she said politely, preparing to continue her walk. "I'm heading to that new Thai restaurant around the corner," he said. "I hear their spring rolls are excellent. Would you care to join me?" Lynn was so startled by the invitation that she momentarily forgot to decline. "Why?" she asked, immediately regretting the bluntness. Professor Takeda laughed. "Because everyone needs to eat, and eating alone is less enjoyable than eating with company." When she hesitated, he added, "Just as colleagues, of course." Lynn knew she should refuse. Getting close to anyone at the academy was dangerous. Questions would lead to more questions, and lies would lead to more lies. Yet something about his kind eyes and the casual way he extended the invitation made it difficult to simply walk away. "I should get home," she said finally. "But thank you." He nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Another time, perhaps. Have a good evening, Lynn." As she walked away, Lynn wondered what it would be like to sit across from someone who loved music as she did, to discuss composers and techniques without revealing too much of herself. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be both the person she was now and the person she had been before. The following morning, Lynn arrived early as usual. She organized her desk, prepared the coffee in the faculty lounge, and reviewed the day's schedule. Everything was normal until she saw the announcement on the staff bulletin board. Annual Donor Gala, 2 weeks away. Lynn's stomach tightened. The gala meant wealthy donors filling the academy, extra work for the administrative staff, and students and faculty showcasing their talents. It was the most stressful time of year for Lynn, not because of the workload, but because of the music that would surround her, the performances she would witness, and the memories that would flood back. "Morning." "Lynn," Ms. Reynolds called as she entered. "Did you see the gala announcement? We'll need to start preparations immediately. The director wants everything perfect this year. Apparently, some big-shot tech entrepreneur is considering a major donation." Lynn nodded, already making a mental list of tasks. "I'll start contacting the caterers today." As her colleagues arrived and the day began in earnest, Lynn buried herself in work, pushing away thoughts of the approaching gala and what it might stir up within her. She had maintained her secret for years now. Just 2 more weeks of careful distance and life would return to its safe, predictable rhythm, or so she thought. The 2 weeks leading up to the donor gala passed in a blur of activity. Lynn worked overtime every day, coordinating with caterers, designing programs, and arranging seating charts. The distraction of constant tasks was welcome. It left her little time to dwell on the upcoming event and the memories it would stir. The night before the gala, Lynn stayed late at the academy reviewing final details. The grand performance hall had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Round tables draped in white linen dotted the floor, and floral arrangements of white lilies and blue hydrangeas adorned every surface. At the center of the stage stood the Academy's prized possession, a magnificent Steinway concert grand piano, polished to a mirror shine. Lynn approached it slowly when no one was looking. This particular piano was reserved for special performances and master classes by visiting artists. Students were rarely allowed to touch it and staff never. Standing before it now, Lynn felt a magnetic pull. She extended her hand, hovering just above the gleaming surface without making contact. "It's something, isn't it?" Lynn jumped and spun around. The night janitor, Mr. Rivera, stood in the doorway with his cleaning cart. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said with a gentle smile. "I just need to give the stage one final polish for tomorrow." "Of course," Lynn said, stepping back quickly. "I was just making sure everything was in place." Mr. Rivera nodded, but his eyes held a knowing look that made Lynn uncomfortable. "You know," he said casually as he began mopping, "I hear you sometimes." Lynn froze. "Hear me?" "In the practice room. Late evenings." He kept his eyes on his work. "You play beautifully." The blood drained from Lynn's face. Her secret, the one thing she had managed to keep private, wasn't as hidden as she'd thought. "I don't know what you mean," she said, gathering her clipboard tightly against her chest. Mr. Rivera looked up, his expression kind. "Don't worry. Your secret is safe with me. My mother was a pianist too. Nothing professional, but she loved it more than anything. I recognize that kind of playing. It comes from somewhere deep." Lynn didn't know what to say. After years of careful privacy, being discovered felt like standing naked on stage. "Thank you for your discretion," she managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course." He returned to his mopping. "We all have our private joys, don't we? Sometimes they're all that keep us going." Lynn nodded and quickly made her exit, her mind racing. If Mr. Rivera had heard her, who else might have? She resolved to be more careful, or perhaps to stop her evening sessions altogether. The thought made her chest tighten painfully. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Lynn arrived at the academy 3 hours early, dressed in the simple black dress and low heels that constituted her version of formal wear. Her hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, her makeup minimal. She had no desire to stand out tonight, quite the opposite. As staff and volunteers bustled about with last-minute preparations, Lynn remained focused on her checklist. She confirmed the arrival time of each performer, double-checked the pronunciation of donor names for the director's welcome speech, and ensured the catering staff had properly set up the bar and buffet tables. "You look like you could use this," Professor Takeda said, appearing at her side with a cup of tea. "Thank you," Lynn said, accepting the cup with surprise. The gesture was unexpected but welcome. Her throat had grown dry from giving directions all morning. "Nervous about tonight?" he asked. "Just busy," she replied. "There's still so much to do." He nodded, looking around at the transformation of the hall. "The Academy certainly knows how to impress. I sometimes wonder what our donors would think if they saw the real heart of this place. Not the fancy galas, but the students practicing until midnight. The janitors who know everyone's secrets. The administrative staff who hold everything together." Lynn glanced at him sharply. Did his mention of secrets mean something? But his expression remained casual, almost wistful. "The donors see what they want to see," she said finally. "Don't we all?" He smiled. "Well, I should get ready for my performance." "Break a leg, Lynn, though I suppose that saying doesn't apply to administrative work." "Better not," she agreed with the smallest hint of a smile. By 6 o'clock, guests began to arrive. Women in elegant gowns and men in tuxedos filed into the hall, their voices creating a growing hum of excitement. Lynn stationed herself near the entrance with the guest list, checking names and directing people to their tables. Most barely glanced at her, their eyes drawn to the glamour of the room beyond. The director of the academy, Dr. Wilson, moved through the crowd like a practiced politician, shaking hands and laughing at jokes. He was particularly attentive to a group that had just arrived. A silver-haired man whom Lynn recognized as Harold Bennett. The tech entrepreneur Ms. Reynolds had mentioned, accompanied by his wife and son. Bennett's son appeared to be in his late 20s, with perfectly styled hair and a smirk that never quite left his face. As they passed Lynn's station, she heard him comment to his companion, "Father insisted we attend this little showcase. Apparently, throwing money at struggling artists makes for good PR." Lynn kept her expression neutral as she continued greeting guests, but her opinion of the young man was firmly set. The formal program was scheduled to begin at 7:30. As the time approached, Lynn helped usher the remaining guests to their seats. She would spend the performances standing at the back, ready to assist with any issues that might arise. Dr. Wilson took the stage to enthusiastic applause. Distinguished guests, benefactors, and friends of Wellington Music Academy, welcome to our annual Donor Appreciation Gala. Tonight, we celebrate not only your tremendous generosity, but also the extraordinary talent that your support nurtures. Lynn half listened to the familiar speech as she scanned the room, mentally checking off items from her list. Everything was running smoothly so far. The performances began with a string quartet of faculty members playing Dvořák. They were followed by a soprano voice student whose rendition of a Puccini aria earned enthusiastic applause. Professor Takeda performed Liszt's La Campanella with technical brilliance, his fingers flying across the keys with precision that made Lynn's own fingers tingle in response. During the intermission, Lynn helped direct the catering staff as they refreshed drinks and brought out small desserts. She was arranging a tray of chocolate-dipped strawberries near the piano when she felt someone watching her. Looking up, she found herself face-to-face with Bennett's son. "Enjoying the show?" he asked, his tone suggesting he found the question amusing. "The performances have been wonderful," Lynn replied politely, continuing her work. "I suppose they're not bad for a school performance," he said, selecting a strawberry. "Though I've heard better at private parties in New York." Lynn said nothing, maintaining her professional smile. "Tell me," he continued, leaning against the piano casually, "do they make all the staff learn about music here or just the important ones?" "Everyone at Wellington appreciates music," she said carefully. "But do you understand it?" He popped the strawberry into his mouth. "I mean, can someone like you tell the difference between Chopin and Schumann?" The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Lynn felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. "I believe anyone can appreciate good music if they take the time to listen." "James," called Harold Bennett from across the room. "Stop bothering the help and come meet the director of the symphony." James rolled his eyes. "Duty calls. Good chat." He sauntered away, leaving Lynn with burning cheeks and a tight jaw. The second half of the program featured more student performances. Lynn tried to focus on her duties, but her encounter with James Bennett had left her unsettled. His dismissive attitude represented everything that had driven her away from the classical music world. The elitism, the judgment, the assumption that art belonged only to the privileged few. As the final scheduled performance concluded, Dr. Wilson returned to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a spectacular showcase of talent." Before we continue with our evening, I'd like to specially recognize our guest of honor, Mr. Harold Bennett, whose company's foundation is considering a major endowment for our scholarship program. Applause filled the room as the elder Bennett stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition. "Now," Dr. Wilson continued, "we invite you all to enjoy more refreshments and conversation. Our faculty will be circulating to answer any questions you may have about our programs." As the formal portion of the evening ended, guests rose from their seats and began mingling. Lynn started clearing programs from empty chairs, moving efficiently through the crowd. She was nearly finished when a commotion near the piano caught her attention. James Bennett stood by the Steinway, a glass of champagne in hand, surrounded by several other young guests. His voice carried across the room. "This whole evening feels like a glorified school recital, doesn't it? I mean, if they wanted to impress potential donors, they should have brought in real talent." Lynn watched from a distance as Professor Takeda approached the group, his expression pleasant but strained. "I'm glad you could attend tonight, Mr. Bennett. I hope some of our performances demonstrated the serious talent we're developing here." "Oh, sure," James replied with a dismissive wave. "For students, it's all very nice. But let's be honest, none of these kids are going to be the next Lang Lang." An uncomfortable silence fell over those nearby. Dr. Wilson hurried over, clearly sensing a potential disaster with an important donor's son. What happened next would replay in Lynn's mind for days to come. James turned, spotted Lynn collecting programs, and his face lit up with malicious inspiration. "Hey, why don't we get a different perspective? What did you think of tonight's performances?" he called out to her. "Do you play too? Maybe you could show us what you've learned working here." All eyes turned to Lynn, who stood frozen, a stack of programs clutched to her chest. "James, please," his father muttered. "Don't put the staff on the spot." "I'm just being inclusive," James insisted with mock innocence. "The arts are for everyone, right? Isn't that what tonight is all about?" He gestured toward the piano. Come on, play us something, anything. Chopsticks, maybe? Lynn felt the room spinning around her. Dr. Wilson looked mortified but trapped, unable to offend the son of a potential major donor. Professor Takeda started to step forward, but James was already walking toward Lynn, his expression a challenge. "We'd all love to hear you play," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wouldn't we?" The room had fallen painfully silent. Lynn could feel dozens of eyes on her, curious, embarrassed, amused. Her cheeks burned and her mouth went dry. The programs in her hands suddenly felt like they weighed 100 pounds. "I don't think," she began quietly. But Dr. Wilson stepped forward, a strained smile on his face. "Now, Mr. Bennett," he said with forced joviality, "our administrative staff are not performers. I'm sure Lynn would rather not—" "Oh, come on," James interrupted, his smirk widening. "It's just a bit of fun. Everyone here has performed except the help. Don't you believe in equality, Dr. Wilson?" The way he emphasized the last question made it clear he was enjoying the director's discomfort. Harold Bennett cleared his throat. "James, that's enough. You're making everyone uncomfortable. I'm just trying to liven things up, Father. This evening could use some unexpected entertainment." He turned back to Lynn. "What do you say? Just one little tune?" Professor Takeda stepped closer to Lynn. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Lynn looked around the room. Dr. Wilson's face showed poorly disguised panic. The Bennett donation was too important to risk offending the family. James was watching her with the satisfied expression of someone who knew he had all the power. A few guests looked away in embarrassment, while others watched with uncomfortable fascination. In that moment, Lynn felt something shift inside her. 15 years of hiding, 15 years of denying who she was and what she could do, all to protect herself from the pain of the past. And here was this entitled young man, using that same pain as casual entertainment. "It's all right," she said softly to Professor Takeda. "I'll play something simple." She handed him the stack of programs and walked toward the piano, each step feeling both terrifying and strangely inevitable. The crowd parted to let her through, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. James Bennett moved aside with an exaggerated bow as though presenting her to an audience. "Don't worry if you mess up," he said loudly. "No one expects much." Lynn sat down at the bench, adjusting it slightly as she'd done thousands of times before. The familiar motion calmed her racing heart. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then she looked up at James Bennett, met his condescending gaze directly, and placed her fingers on the keys. She began with the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Soft, delicate, deceptively simple. She played the first phrase tentatively, as though uncertain, allowing James his moment of smug satisfaction. She could almost feel him thinking, "Exactly what I expected." Then, as the melody began to develop, Lynn allowed a bit more of herself to emerge. Her touch became more assured, her phrasing more deliberate. A few guests who had been chatting quietly fell silent. Dr. Wilson's anxious expression gave way to confusion. When she reached the middle section, where the piece blooms into its full emotional depth, Lynn finally let go. Her fingers moved with the fluid precision of someone who had lived inside this music for decades. The room around her disappeared. There was no gala, no audience, no past or future. Only the present moment, only the music flowing from her hands like water. The crescendo built, her body swaying slightly with the current of sound. When she reached the climax of the piece, her fingers dancing across the keys with both power and delicacy, she heard a gasp from somewhere in the crowd. The final section returned to the gentle theme, but now transformed by all that had come before. Lynn played the concluding notes with such tender precision that the final chord seemed to hang in the air even after her fingers lifted from the keys. For 3 heartbeats, there was absolute silence, then the room erupted in applause. Lynn blinked, suddenly thrust back into reality. The faces watching her now showed astonishment rather than pity. Dr. Wilson stood open-mouthed. Professor Takeda was smiling broadly. Even Harold Bennett was applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Only James looked displeased, his earlier smugness replaced by embarrassment and confusion. "That was extraordinary," an older woman near the piano said. "Are you a teacher here as well?" Before Lynn could answer, another guest called out, "Play something else." Requests began coming from all directions. Lynn sat frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had planned to play adequately, well enough not to embarrass herself but not so well as to draw attention. Yet in the moment, muscle memory and emotion had taken over and she had played as she once did with her full heart and skill. Perhaps something more challenging? Suggested a man who Lynn recognized as a music critic for the local paper. Bach, perhaps? Or Chopin? Lynn looked desperately toward the exit, but there was no escape route. The crowd had gathered around the piano, effectively trapping her on the bench. She glanced at Professor Takeda, who gave her an encouraging nod. Taking another deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys again. If she was going to do this, really do this after all these years, there was only one piece that felt right. She began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, first movement. Without an orchestra behind her, she had to suggest the missing instruments through her interpretation, bringing out counter-melodies and harmonies that would normally be played by others. The technical demands were enormous. Rapid runs, complex chord progressions, dramatic dynamic shifts. But Lynn's fingers remembered. They remembered every note, every nuance, every emotional peak and valley. As she played, memories flooded back. Her mother sitting beside her at their old upright piano, gently correcting her hand position. Her father listening from the doorway of their small apartment, his face full of quiet pride. The first time she performed this piece with an orchestra, just months before the accident. The rush of connection with the audience, the feeling that music could bridge any gap between souls. The cadenza arrived, the extended solo section where the pianist takes center stage. Lynn unleashed everything she had kept bottled up for 15 years. Her hands became a blur, traversing the entire keyboard with a controlled wildness that made several guests step back in amazement. The music surged and receded, tender one moment and thunderous the next. When she finally brought the movement to its powerful conclusion, striking the final chords with absolute conviction, she was breathing hard as though she had run a marathon. This time, the silence lasted only a second before the room exploded in thunderous applause. People were on their feet, some shouting "Bravo!" Others simply stared in disbelief. Dr. Wilson looked like he might faint. "My dear," Harold Bennett said, stepping forward when the applause finally died down. "Where on earth have you been hiding? That was world-class playing." Lynn stood from the bench on shaky legs. "I just work in the office," she said quietly. "Not anymore, you don't," declared the music critic, pulling out his phone. "The world needs to hear this. What did you say your name was?" "Lynn," she replied, overwhelmed by the attention. "Lynn Chen." Professor Takeda made his way through the crowd to stand beside her. "I think Ms. Chen has given us quite enough entertainment for one evening," he said firmly. "This is, after all, a reception, not a concert." Lynn shot him a grateful look as he guided her away from the piano and the clamoring guests. He led her to a small side door that staff used during events. "You never mentioned you could play like that," he said when they were temporarily alone in the hallway. "You never asked," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline wearing off. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Lynn nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "I need some air." "Of course. Take all the time you need," he hesitated. "For what it's worth, that was one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever heard." "And I've heard many." Lynn managed a small smile. "Thank you." As she slipped away toward the back exit, she heard the buzz of excited conversation from the hall. Her secret was out. After 15 years of hiding, of being invisible, she had revealed herself in the most public way possible. There would be no going back to her quiet, anonymous life after this. The thought terrified her, but something else stirred beneath the fear, something that felt almost like relief. Outside in the cool night air, Lynn leaned against the brick wall of the academy and looked up at the stars. She remembered her mother's words from long ago. "Music isn't just in your fingers, Lynn, it's in your heart. As long as your heart beats, the music is still there." For 15 years, her heart had continued beating, but she had kept the music locked away. Tonight it had broken free. What that meant for tomorrow, she wasn't sure. But for now, for this moment, she allowed herself to feel the simple joy of playing again, truly playing, with nothing held back. The door opened behind her, and Lynn turned, expecting to see Professor Takeda. Instead, Mr. Rivera stood there, a gentle smile on his face. I heard, he said simply. I was cleaning the back hallway. It was beautiful. Thank you, Lynn replied. So what happens now? He asked. Lynn shook her head. I don't know. Whatever it is, he said, I think your parents would be proud. Lynn looked at him in surprise. She had never mentioned her parents to anyone at the academy. Mr. Rivera shrugged. Like I said, I hear you sometimes. The way you play that Debussy piece, it sounds like a tribute. Lynn felt tears welling in her eyes. It was the last piece I played for them. He nodded, understanding. Music has a way of keeping people with us, doesn't it? He turned to go back inside, but paused at the door. They're all asking about you in there. Dr. Wilson is telling everyone you're our secret weapon. I think your desk job might be in jeopardy. Despite everything, Lynn found herself laughing softly. I'm good at filing, she protested. Yes, Mr. Rivera agreed with a wink, but you're better at Rachmaninoff. As he disappeared back inside, Lynn took one more deep breath of the night air. Her life had just changed course dramatically, and she had no idea where it would lead. But for the first time in 15 years, she felt curious to find out. Lynn didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening, the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers after so many years of holding back, the faces in the crowd as they realized what they were hearing, the rush of emotion that had carried her through pieces she hadn't properly performed in over a decade. By morning, she had convinced herself that she had exaggerated the whole thing in her mind. Surely the audience's reaction hadn't been that enthusiastic. Surely her playing, after years of only brief practice sessions, couldn't have been that impressive. She arrived at work early as usual, hoping to slip into her routine before anyone could mention the previous night. But as soon as she pushed open the door to the administrative office, she knew things had changed. Ms. Reynolds looked up from her computer and stared at Lynn as if seeing her for the first time. There you are, she said, rising from her chair. Dr. Wilson wants to see you in his office immediately. Is something wrong? Lynn asked, though she knew perfectly well what this was about. Ms. Reynolds shook her head in disbelief. Wrong? Everyone's talking about your performance last night. Why didn't you ever tell us you could play like that? All this time, you've been sitting here filing papers when you could have been teaching master classes. Lynn set her bag down at her desk. It's complicated, she said quietly. Well, you'd better go explain your complicated to Dr. Wilson. He's been waiting for you. Lynn nodded and made her way to the director's office, her stomach in knots. When she knocked on the door, Dr. Wilson's voice called, Come in. She entered to find not only Dr. Wilson, but also Professor Takeda and an older man she didn't recognize seated around the director's desk. Ah, Lynn, there you are. Dr. Wilson stood, gesturing for her to take the remaining chair. His entire demeanor toward her had changed overnight. Gone was the distracted, vaguely dismissive attitude of a boss to a minor employee. Now he looked at her with the eager respect he usually reserved for important donors. I believe you already know Professor Takeda, and this is Gregory Thompson, chair of our piano department. Thompson extended his hand. A pleasure to formally meet you, Miss Chen. Your performance last night was, well, frankly, it was stunning. Lynn shook his hand hesitantly. Thank you. Please sit down, Dr. Wilson urged. We have much to discuss. Lynn perched on the edge of the chair, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. First, Dr. Wilson began, I must apologize for putting you in that awkward position last night. Young Mr. Bennett's behavior was completely inappropriate, and I should have shut it down immediately. It's all right, Lynn said automatically. No, it's not, Professor Takeda interjected firmly, but your response to the situation was remarkable. Dr. Wilson nodded enthusiastically. More than remarkable. Lynn, you've been hiding an extraordinary gift. The way you played Rachmaninoff, he shook his head in wonder. I've been in music education for 30 years, and I've rarely heard anything approaching that level of artistry. I'm a bit out of practice, Lynn murmured. Looking down at her hands, Thompson chuckled. If that was out of practice, I can't imagine what you sound like when you're in form. He leaned forward. Ms. Chen, may I ask where you studied? Your technique suggests serious classical training. Lynn hesitated. She had spent so long avoiding questions about her past that answering directly felt almost physically painful. But these were music educators. They would know if she lied about her background. I studied at the Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing, she said finally. Many years ago. Thompson's eyebrows shot up. One of the most prestigious conservatories in Asia. And your teachers? Professor Wei for my early years. Then Professor Liang Yu. Now both Thompson and Dr. Wilson looked stunned. Liang Yu personally taught you? Thompson asked. He rarely accepts students under the age of 18. I was 14 when I began with him, Lin admitted. He made an exception. Extraordinary, Dr. Wilson murmured. And yet you've been working as our administrative assistant for, 3 years now? Never once mentioning your background? Lin met his gaze steadily. I needed a job. You needed an assistant. My past didn't seem relevant. Professor Takeda, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I think what we're all wondering, Lin, is why someone with your obvious talent and training would choose to hide it away. The question hung in the air. Lin looked at each of their faces, curious, confused, but not unkind. Perhaps it was time to stop running from her past. Not all of it, perhaps, but enough to explain. My parents died in an accident when I was 17, she said quietly. They had sacrificed everything for my music education. After they were gone, I couldn't separate the music from the loss. Every time I played, I felt their absence. So I stopped. The room fell silent. Professor Takeda nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had suspected. I'm very sorry for your loss, Dr. Wilson said, his tone gentler now. That explains a great deal. But last night was unexpected, Lin finished for him. I hadn't planned to play like that. I thought I would just get through a simple piece and be done with it. But once I started, she shrugged, unable to explain how 15 years of suppressed passion had broken through at once. Thompson cleared his throat. Ms. Chen, talent like yours doesn't disappear even when it's neglected. What we heard last night wasn't just technical skill, though that was impressive enough. It was the playing of someone with a profound musical soul. Lin felt her cheeks grow warm at the praise. Which brings us to why we asked you here today, Dr. Wilson continued. The response to your performance has been overwhelming. The video Mr. Patel from the Arts Council took has already been shared hundreds of times online. Lin's head snapped up. Video? Dr. Wilson nodded. I'm afraid so. Many guests were recording by the time you began the Rachmaninoff. And this morning, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. The local newspaper wants to do a feature. 3 major donors have specifically asked about you. And Harold Bennett, yes, the father of that unfortunate young man, has expressed interest in funding a scholarship in your name. Lin felt lightheaded. This was exactly what she had feared. Exposure, attention, expectations. I'm not looking for any of that, she said, her voice tight. We understand this is overwhelming, Professor Takeda said gently, but it also presents an opportunity for you and for the Academy. We would like to offer you a position, Dr. Wilson said, getting to the point. As a member of our piano faculty. Lin stared at him in disbelief. But I'm not a teacher. Have you ever tried? Thompson asked with a small smile. No, but your playing reveals not just technique but understanding, he continued. That's what makes a good teacher. The technical aspects can be learned. We're not suggesting you take on a full teaching load immediately, Dr. Wilson clarified. Perhaps begin with a few advanced students, some master classes. And of course we would very much like you to perform at our faculty recital series. Lin felt panic rising in her chest. I don't think I can. You already have, Professor Takeda reminded her quietly. Last night proved that. That was different. I wasn't planning to. Ms. Chen, Thompson interrupted gently. May I ask you something? When you were playing last night, how did it feel? Lin paused, considering the question. Terrifying, she admitted. But also, right, like finding something I'd lost. Thompson nodded. Music isn't just what we do. For people like us, it's who we are. You can try to deny that part of yourself, but it doesn't go away. Lin looked down at her hands, the hands that had betrayed her carefully constructed anonymity, that had revealed her true self to a room full of strangers. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Dr. Wilson agreed quickly. Take all the time you need. The offer remains open, he hesitated. In the meantime, however, there is the matter of the media attention. Several journalists have requested interviews, and as I mentioned, the video is already circulating. Lin felt her chest tighten again. I don't want to talk to journalists. Understandable, Professor Takeda said. but perhaps a simple statement. Just to satisfy curiosity and reduce the speculation? Lynn looked at him uncertainly. I could help you draft something, he offered. Just the basics, your background, a brief explanation of why you chose to step away from performance, and a request for privacy as you consider your next steps. It was a reasonable suggestion. Better to control the narrative than to have strangers making up stories about her. All right, she agreed reluctantly. Excellent, Dr. Wilson said, clearly relieved. And what about your administrative duties in the meantime? Lynn hadn't even thought about that. I can continue working as normal, she said. I don't want special treatment. The three men exchanged glances. Perhaps a compromise, Professor Takeda suggested. Reduced administrative hours to allow you time to practice. If you decide to accept our offer, you'll want to prepare. The thought of having designated time to practice, officially, openly, was both appealing and terrifying. I'll consider it, Lynn said. As the meeting concluded and Lynn rose to leave, Thompson asked one final question. Ms. Chen, forgive my curiosity, but what happened after the accident? You were clearly on track for a major concert career. Did you stop playing entirely? Lynn paused at the door. Almost entirely. I came to America to live with my uncle. He wasn't interested in music. There was no money for lessons, no piano in the house. By the time I was on my own, it seemed too late to go back. It's never too late, Thompson said simply. Not with a gift like yours. Lynn nodded politely but didn't respond. As she closed the door behind her, she wondered if that was true. 15 years was a long time. The musical world moved on quickly. Young prodigies were discovered every year. Even if she wanted to return to that path, and she wasn't sure she did, would there still be a place for her? Back at her desk, Lynn found a small vase of flowers waiting. The card simply read, "Thank you for the music. Mr. Rivera." The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to her eyes. As she arranged the vase beside her computer, Ms. Reynolds approached with a stack of mail. These came for you, she said, handing Lynn several envelopes. And your phone has been ringing nonstop. I took messages. She held out a notepad filled with names and numbers. Thank you, Lynn said, overwhelmed. Ms. Reynolds hesitated. For what it's worth, I think you should take the teaching position. We'd miss you here, of course, but... She gestured to the tiny office with its fluorescent lighting and metal filing cabinets. This was never where you belonged. As her colleague walked away, Lynn looked down at the pile of messages and mail. Her carefully constructed world of anonymity had shattered overnight. The question now was what to build in its place. Later that afternoon, as Lynn was responding to emails, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway of the administrative office. James Bennett stood awkwardly, his usual smirk replaced by an expression of genuine discomfort. Can I help you? Lynn asked coolly. He cleared his throat. I came to apologize. For last night, I was being a jerk. Lynn said nothing, waiting. I had no idea you could play like that, he continued. It was incredible, actually. My father says you studied at the Central Conservatory. That's impressive. He shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For putting you on the spot. And for being condescending. Lynn considered him for a moment. Apology accepted, she said finally. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because she didn't need to carry the weight of resentment. He nodded, looking relieved. My father wanted me to tell you he's serious about the scholarship. He thinks talented students who can't afford tuition should have the same opportunities you did. He hesitated. Maybe you could help select the recipients, since you know what it's like. The suggestion caught Lynn by surprise. The thought of helping young musicians who, like her younger self, needed financial support to pursue their dreams, there was something appealing about that. I'll think about it, she said. As James left, Lynn turned back to her computer. Outside her window, students crossed the courtyard, instrument cases slung over their shoulders, heading to practice rooms and lessons. For years, she had watched them from a distance, separate from their world. Now somehow she had been thrust back into it. The question was whether she would run away again, or finally find the courage to stay. 3 weeks after the donor gala, Lynn stood alone in the Academy's main recital hall. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the empty seats. On stage, the same Steinway grand piano gleamed in the golden light, waiting. Lynn had been coming here during her lunch breaks, slipping in when no one else was around. Not to play, not yet, but to sit in the back row and imagine what it would be like to perform again. Not by accident or compulsion, but by choice. Today something pulled her toward the stage. She walked slowly down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Climbing the 3 steps to the stage, she approached the piano with the reverence of someone entering a sacred place. She sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and positioned her hands above the keys without touching them. For a moment, she simply breathed, gathering her courage. Then she began to play. Not Rachmaninoff or Debussy this time, but a simple piece she had composed herself during sleepless nights over the past weeks. It was a melody that had come to her in fragments, sometimes in dreams, sometimes while washing dishes or walking to work. A melody that spoke of loss and rediscovery, of hiding and being found. As she played the final notes, a voice from the shadows said, "That's beautiful. I've never heard it before." Lynn turned to see Professor Takeda standing near the side entrance. She hadn't heard him come in. "It's nothing," she said, embarrassed at being caught. "Just something I've been working on." "It's certainly not nothing," he replied, walking toward the stage. "Have you written music before?" Lynn shook her head. "Not really. Just little pieces when I was young. You should develop this one. It has something special." He sat in the front row, studying her with gentle curiosity. "Have you made a decision yet?" "About the teaching position?" Lynn sighed. It had been 3 weeks of thinking, of weighing options, of battling her fears. "I'm still not sure I'm qualified to teach," she said. "It's been so long." "You've been practicing, though," he observed. "I've noticed the practice room lights on early mornings, late evenings." Lynn nodded, slightly embarrassed that her private sessions hadn't been as private as she thought. "I'm rusty," she admitted. "My technique isn't what it was." "But your musicality remains," he countered. "Technique can be rebuilt. The soul of a musician, that's something you either have or you don't. And you have it, Lynn." She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing them. "I received another offer yesterday," she said quietly. "From the symphony. They want me to audition for their upcoming season. Apparently someone sent them the video." Professor Takeda's eyebrows rose. "That's impressive. Are you considering it?" "I don't know." She looked out at the empty hall, trying to imagine it full of people, all watching, listening, judging. The thought made her stomach tighten. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of pressure again." "What about a compromise?" he suggested. "Start with teaching. Perhaps some chamber music performances with faculty. Small steps back into the musical world." Lynn considered this. Small steps sounded more manageable than diving straight back into the high-pressure environment of professional performance. "I've also been thinking about the scholarship," she said. "The one Mr. Bennett wants to establish." "Oh?" "If I were involved, I could make sure it goes to students who really need it. Kids like I was, with talent but no money, maybe from immigrant families or difficult backgrounds." Professor Takeda smiled. "That sounds like a worthy cause." "It would mean staying here," Lynn said, thinking aloud. "Becoming part of the academy in a real way. Is that something you want?" Lynn looked around the recital hall again, seeing it with new eyes. For 3 years she had worked at Wellington without ever feeling like she belonged. She had deliberately kept herself separate, hidden. But now, "I think it might be," she said, surprising herself with the admission. Professor Takeda nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "Then perhaps you have your answer." "Maybe," Lynn agreed. "But there's something I need to do first." The following Saturday, Lynn stood in a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. It had taken some searching to find this place. Her uncle hadn't kept in touch after she left his home at 18, and she had never asked where her parents' ashes had been interred. But public records and a helpful funeral home director had finally led her here, to a simple granite marker with 2 names, Chen Wei and Chen Mei Lin, beloved parents. Lynn knelt and placed a small bouquet of white lilies by the stone. "I'm sorry it took me so long to visit," she whispered in Mandarin. "I've been lost for a while." The cemetery was quiet except for the rustle of autumn leaves and distant birdsong. Lynn had come alone, though Professor Takeda had offered to accompany her. This conversation needed privacy. "I stopped playing after you died," she continued softly. "I thought it hurt too much. But I was wrong. Not playing hurt more because it meant forgetting parts of you. The way Baba hummed while he cooked. The way Mama tapped her fingers on the table to help me keep rhythm. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. These were healing tears, not the bitter ones she had cried for years. I'm going to start teaching, she told her parents, and maybe performing again, slowly. I think you would like that. I think that's what you wanted for me, not just to be successful, but to be whole. She sat in silence for a while, feeling the gentle autumn sun on her face. For the first time in 15 years, memories of her parents brought more comfort than pain. They had given her the gift of music, and she had nearly thrown it away. Now she had a chance to honor that gift by sharing it with others. As she stood to leave, she touched the cool stone one last time. I'll come back soon, she promised, and I'll play for you again. 2 months later, Lynn stood backstage at Wellington Academy's winter faculty concert. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience as they filled the hall. The event had sold out quickly after word spread that the office assistant turned piano virtuoso would be performing. Lynn wore a simple black dress, nicer than her work clothes, but nothing flashy. Her hair was styled in a loose updo rather than her usual tight bun. The physical transformation was subtle, but the internal one was profound. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to hide or blend into the background. Nervous? Professor Takeda asked, appearing beside her in his concert attire. Terrified, Lynn admitted with a small smile. But a good kind of terrified, I think. Your students are all in the front row, he told her. They wouldn't miss it for anything. Over the past 2 months, Lynn had begun teaching a small group of advanced students. She had approached the role with trepidation, certain she would have nothing to offer. But to her surprise, she found that the years away from music had given her a unique perspective. She understood her students' struggles and frustrations in a way that continuously successful musicians sometimes couldn't. The Bennett Scholarship recipients are here too, she added. Mr. Bennett brought them himself. The scholarship had officially launched last month, with Lynn heading the selection committee. They had chosen 3 students for the first year, all talented young pianists from disadvantaged backgrounds who reminded Lynn of herself at that age. Places everyone, the stage manager called quietly. 5 minutes to curtain. As the other faculty performers made final preparations, Lynn took a moment to center herself. She had chosen to play the piece she had been composing over the past months, now expanded into a full-length work she called Return. She had practiced diligently, rebuilding her technique day by day. Her playing wasn't exactly what it had been at 17. There was a new maturity to it now, a depth born of loss and rediscovery. Professor Thompson had called it more human than her technically brilliant but emotionally guarded teenage performances. The stage manager signaled, and the concert began. Lynn would perform last, the featured soloist of the evening. As she waited backstage, listening to her colleagues play, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the night of the gala, when James Bennett's cruel challenge had accidentally set her free. She thought of Mr. Rivera, who had heard her playing in secret and kept her confidence until she was ready. She thought of Professor Takeda's gentle guidance and Dr. Wilson's enthusiasm for her talent, even when she couldn't see it herself. And she thought of her parents, who had sacrificed so much to nurture her gift, not so she could become famous, but so she could experience the joy of making music with her whole heart. When it was finally her turn, Lynn walked onto the stage with steady steps. The applause was warm and welcoming. She took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience for the first time. In the front row, she saw her students watching with excitement and the scholarship recipients with wide-eyed wonder. Mr. Rivera stood at the back, giving her a discreet thumbs up. Even James Bennett was there, sitting beside his father, his formerly smug expression replaced by genuine interest. Lynn took a deep breath and began to play. The piece started softly, hesitantly, like someone testing whether they remembered how to walk. Gradually, it built in confidence and complexity, weaving in subtle references to the Chinese folk songs her mother had sung to her as a child, the classical pieces that had formed the backbone of her training, and even a hint of the Debussy she had played for her parents that final time. As she reached the middle section, she closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her without restraint. This was not a performance to impress or prove anything. It was an offering, to her students, to the audience, to her parents' memory, and to herself. The final section of the piece returned to the simple, poignant melody she had first played for Professor Takeda in the empty recital hall. But now it was transformed, imbued with all that had come before. The loss, the hiding, the rediscovery, and finally the acceptance. The last notes hung in the air like a question answered at last. For a moment after she finished, there was complete silence. Then the hall erupted in applause. Lynn stood and bowed, accepting the audience's appreciation not with embarrassment but with gratitude. As she took her final bow, she caught sight of a small figure slipping into the back of the hall. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, watching with unmistakable longing. Lynn recognized that look. She had worn it herself as a child, watching pianists and dreaming of making such beautiful sounds. In that moment, Lynn knew with absolute certainty that she had found her path forward. Not just as a performer or a teacher, but as someone who could recognize that look of longing and help transform it into possibility. Backstage after the concert, amid the congratulations and flowers, Lynn found a moment of quiet to send a silent thought to her parents. I found my way back, not to where I was going before, but to where I need to be now. Outside, snow had begun to fall, covering the city in a blank white canvas, a new beginning. Lynn watched the flakes drift past the window and smiled. After 15 years of winter in her heart, spring was finally coming.